In this video, I want to talk about the pros and cons of raising meat rabbits in a colony. And that's what we've been doing, in fact. And the main reason why we decided to raise our meat rabbits, New Zealand's, in a colony is because unlike the solitary wild rabbits like the American cottontail, most meat rabbit breeds, including the New Zealand's, Californian, Chinchilla, etc., they naturally thrive in colonies. They naturally live in larger groups and are not solitary. And so we decided to do the same. We got a breeding trio of New Zealand's a while back, and we started to raise them for meat to feed ourselves as well as our German Shepherd. In this video, I want to talk about the pros and cons a little bit, so you can, if you're new to meat rabbits, if you're considering adding new meat rabbits to your homestead or raising meat rabbits, you might be able to use some of those pros and cons as guidelines to decide if a colony setup might be right for you. And let's start with some of the advantages of raising meat rabbits in a colony. I mean, the bottom line really is it provides it mimics the natural environment that those rabbits are used to. You know, they live in a group, and that's what they like best. They're not solitary, and that was really one of the main factors, because we always try to raise our animals in an environment that's as natural as possible to their, I guess, wild counterparts. Number two is infrastructure requirements. You know, if you want to raise rabbits in cages, depending on the number of rabbits, of course, you're going to get the does and bucks, etc. You have to get different cages set up, maybe with fans. You need to, cover them. There is a lot of infrastructure, potentially a lot of infrastructure required to make that work and to make it as convenient as possible for you to raise them. In our case, all we did is we built one relatively large rabbit hutch where everyone is in. Not the grow-outs, we moved them out then into mobile rabbit tractors that we can move across the lawn, but our breeding trio as well as the two litters of each doe are in that hutch, and they all live together, and it just makes the infrastructure needs fairly simple. We only need one watering system. We only need one feeder. Well, actually we have two just because of the number of rabbits, but we don't have to have a dedicated watering system and feeding equipment for every single cage that we would potentially need if we went the traditional cage route. Daily chores is another thing. I have a day job, and my wife, homeschools the kids, etc. So we are not full-time farmers. And so we always try to keep chores to a minimum and try to keep everything running as efficiently as possible. And so by having everyone, with the exception of the grow-outs, in a single hutch, it makes it very easy in the morning to do the chores. We just check the water. It's hooked up to a rain barrel that gets fed, by rain. So we don't have to fill that barrel. And that feeds all the nipples. We have a separate bowl, a water bowl hooked up to our water, to a hose. So there's always water. We don't have to worry about, we need to refill the water or anything. The only thing we do is we bring them fresh greens every morning, and we make sure they have, their pellets, etc., and that the water is somewhat clean. Otherwise, we have to dump it every so often. So it keeps the chores relatively simple in comparison to, having to do this for X number of cages. One thing that is not required as part of a colony setup, but that we chose to do, is to allow them to burrow. So in other words, our hutch is actually on soil. We dug down 3 feet, we laid a mesh wire on the bottom, and then we filled the dirt back in. But that basically gives them 3 feet of room to make tunnels to burrow, basically. And that's another one of their natural behaviors that we wanted to encourage. So they are allowed to build tunnels, which has a number of advantages and also some disadvantages. But the advantages really are that we've practically increased their square footage, because they have 2 levels almost. They have, the underground, they have the main level, and then they even have some pellets where they can jump on top. So we have more than just what the square footage of our rabbit hutch would suggest. They can also regulate their temperature much better, because underground, temperature is fairly consistent. So even if it's super hot or super cold outside, they can just go underground, which is, during the day, most of the kids, they're always underground. Just the adults are usually above ground, and they can, manage their own temperature, and it's not a problem. You don't have to worry about, nesting boxes or anything. They take care of everything. So you don't have to, there is very little maintenance and work involved, and they just do their thing. Immunity is another big issue. I mean, allowing rabbits to socialize helps support their immune system. It's much like, human kids, when they get together, yes, they exchange germs, they might get, the sniffles or whatever, but ultimately it benefits their immune system from having them all together. especially if it's a somewhat enclosed group. We don't have, rabbits that visit our farm, and then leave again like kids would. So it's relatively enclosed, but still it builds their immunity, and we've not had any major issues with disease, fortunately. Meat flavor is also another aspect. The more the rabbits can use their muscles, the more flavorful the meat is. Yes, it's a little bit tougher, and that's one of the downsides, but just the flavor of a rabbit that can move, that is active, is better than one that is just sitting in a cage and cannot really move much at all. Breeding and kindling is very hands-off, which is a pro and a con, as we'll talk about here in a bit. But the advantage is you don't have to do anything. There is no bringing the buck to the doe or vice versa, or, timing the breeding, etc. They just do whatever they want to. And they breed. Every month or 6 weeks or whatever, we have a new litter, or at least the doe is pregnant again. We see the kids usually for the first time when they are about 3 weeks old. That's when they come out from the tunnels. But beyond that, there is nothing, absolutely nothing we have to do. They take care of everything. They clean up giving birth, obviously, building the nests, nothing that we have to do, nothing we have to be involved in. We don't have to separate the buck, bring it in, take it out, etc. They all live happily together. The doe only gets bred when she wants to. The buck, does not eat the kids. Everything is just working as it would in nature. Very hands-off, and we very much like that because that means less work for us. Now, keep in mind, we are breeding those meat rabbits to produce or make food for us. We are not commercial breeders. We don't care about breeding performance or, some of the other maybe metrics that someone would care about who breeds rabbits commercially. We don't care about that. We also don't necessarily care about natural selection and keep, we just let the trio breed until they're, don't breed anymore, and then we get a new trio. Maybe at some point, we'll separate some of the, the better ones and keep them in a separate rabbit hutch in the same setup, if we want to keep them and use them as our future breeding stock. But for now, we just let them do their thing. It's been working beautifully. We every couple of weeks we can harvest 6 to 7 rabbits, and that's really all we wanted. Now, there are a couple of disadvantages to letting them be in a colony, and in particular letting them burrow. And let's maybe start with breeding performance and record keeping. We don't know when our rabbits are born, because we don't see what's happening underground. We tried one of those cameras, like on a cable to stick it in and see what's going on, but it didn't really work, and ultimately we don't really care. We see those kids, as I said, usually around the 3-week mark. That's when they come out, and we see, there is a new litter. And then sometimes we know who the litter is from, but not all the time. So usually we see it, when we see a little one nursing at the mom, we say, okay, that litter is from, mom number A or mom number B. We also, notice right now, for example, one mom is pregnant and the other one, there is already a litter underground. We suspect because she doesn't look pregnant anymore. And usually that's the time of the month when, we would have a new litter. So we suspect that whatever is underground right now belongs to mom A, and whatever in mom B is still pregnant. And there's usually always a 2-week or so difference between the litters. So one are always a little bit bigger already than the other one, so we can kind of tell them apart. But it's still difficult, and if you want to keep detailed record of birth weights, etc., and all of those things, it's almost impossible, especially if you let them burrow. So we don't do that. We don't care about it. But if that's something you care about, the colony burrowing approach is probably not for you. Catching rabbits, for the purpose of treating them, of whatever you might need to do, tagging their ears or whatever, can be a challenge. Now, our kids, fortunately, they've made it their mission to cuddle with the small ones once they're out of the tunnels. And so, they catch them, they spend an hour in there until they've caught every single one, and then they cuddle with them, and then the rabbits get used to it, and then you can easily pick them up. But especially in the beginning with the first litter, that was almost impossible to catch. It was like a 4-man or if the entire family was involved in catching those rabbits when we moved them to the tractor, because they can go underground, and in underground there's nothing you can do. You have to wait until they come out and then block the tunnel entrances. So that's another downside of that approach. Disease control is another potential issue, and unfortunately we haven't had any diseases. Our rabbits seem to have a very good immune system, which is encouraged by being in close contact with each other. But if you introduce a disease either from the outside, or if one of the rabbits gets sick, chances are every single one gets sick, or at least there is a higher chance because they are so close together. That's another potential disadvantage. Waste control can be a problem depending on how you set up. If you use a deep litter method, it's usually not a problem because you just add fresh litter on top and it turns into compost. In our case, we are on soil. So, the urine, seeps into the soil. In the beginning, we didn't do deep litter because we were on soil and most of it got absorbed. But then, we also started just adding wood chips on top and, we do that every so often and that takes care of things. But if you're on concrete and if deep littering is not an option or you don't want to do this, that means you have to, clean it out. If you have rabbits in cages where the droppings can fall through to the ground and you catch them and then carry them off, it can be much easier. Again, it depends on what kind of system you want to set up and what's most convenient for you. The meat, as I alluded to, is tougher likely in colony rabbits because they use their muscles more. So it's, again, more flavorful, but also tougher. That means you either harvest the rabbits a little earlier than usual or you cook them longer. Now, our rabbits, we typically harvest when they have about 4.5 pounds. And so far, meat has been excellent. There was no issue whatsoever with meat. Wasn't tough. Was very good. And yeah, but that could be a potential downside if you prefer very tender meat. Now, before we wrap it up here, let's talk about a couple of frequently asked questions so you get an idea of what's required. First is how much square feet of space do colony rabbits need? And as a rule of thumb, each buck needs approximately 10 square feet, and each doe, including her litter, one litter, requires approximately 20 square feet of floor space. Now, our rabbit hutch, the one we have outside, has 96 square feet, and that's more than enough space more than enough room for one buck and the two does with their respective litter. And then, so at peak times, we might have, 17 rabbits or so in the colony that live on, those two levels basically. And then the grow-outs, once they are about maybe 8-10 weeks or so, we move them into separate tractors that we pull across the lawn so they eat fresh grass and fewer pellets. And we provide enough room for the new litter that might already be underground. The second thing we've heard a lot, well, doesn't the buck eat the baby bunnies? Well, there is a risk of that happening depending on your setup, maybe depending on how much space, etc. you have. Our buck is like the gentlest dude you've ever seen. It's the friendliest one. You can pick him up, you can turn him around like a baby, and he just lets you do everything with him. He's super gentle, super nice. He is not shown any aggression whatsoever. Now, are there aggressive bucks? Maybe there are, maybe that happens, but in our case that doesn't seem to be the case. And also, in nature, if rabbits live in a colony, they live in a colony. So I guess by default, bucks are used to living with kids. And I don't think it's an issue per se. Not that it cannot be an issue, but I don't think that's something you would necessarily expect. The second thing is, doesn't the doe get overbred when the buck is always with her? The doe tells the buck when she's ready to be bred. So I don't think there's an issue. Does like to be pregnant. That's what they do. They breed like rabbits, literally. And so we've not had that issue. The buck doesn't seem to be trying, when she's either pregnant or when she doesn't want to. So based on what we've seen, no issue whatsoever. They get pregnant regularly, but we've not seen the buck making anything more difficult. What do we feed our colony rabbits, or what do you feed colony rabbits? We have a combination of fresh greens that we collect from the backyard, whatever we can find. We grow some alfalfa and some legumes and leafy greens and stuff to feed them, or just grab, weeds or whatever we can find, twigs from trees that they can eat. There are certain things rabbits should that they cannot eat, but that's what we feed them. And then hay, fresh hay and pellets. That's really that combination. It's free choice. They eat whatever you want to. For fresh water supply, I've mentioned, we use a combination of nipples and a bowl that are fed by a 100-gallon rain barrel as well as a water hose. So we have two kind of systems working together in case one, breaks for whatever reason. There's always a second source of water. With that, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to link a couple of additional resources and especially a blog post that I've written on the very topic that provides even more information of what I could cover in this video. So check that out. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, stick around. Until the next time.